First Edition is a ministry of First Community Church, a place of worship for everyone, regardless of religious background. Join us to enhance your spiritual journey and share in God's love and grace. And now, First Edition.
Jesus, Almost Heaven, West Virginia. I know you were thinking that. Blue Ridge Mountains, Shenandoah River. You already recognize the song made famous by John Denver way back in the early days of the dinosaurs, whenever that was. It's a song that's had a universal appeal, though. I did a little bit of reading this week about it and the history of it. One of the original lyrics was Almost Heaven, Massachusetts. Now, I like people from Massachusetts, but that just doesn't quite fit. It seems like it ought to be West Virginia. Many artists and groups have covered this well-known song, Take Me Home, Country Road. I heard one 20 years ago by Iz. Anybody ever remember Iz? A Hawaiian singer, beautiful, soulful voice, a large man. He's in the resurrection now, but I remember somebody sending me a CD of his music and plugging it in my car and just sitting in the parking lot, listening all through the entire CD before I went into my office, especially his version of Almost Heaven. He changed the words, West Makaha. Google that, I-Z, Almost Heaven, West Makaha. I guarantee you will enjoy hearing this man sing. I found another one this week, too, where it's used as the promo for a video game, as a way of setting the tone for this video game. Although the video game is unusual, it's set in this dystopian future when most of humankind has been destroyed and people travel in time from the past to the future to try to help resurrect humanity and humankind. I called my son up, my son Stephen, to make sure that this was true, and he said, yes, but why are you asking about a video game? I tried to say, look, we invented video games in the 70s, but he wouldn't have anything to do with that. I believe this song is so loved because it speaks to that universal desire. Take me home. Take me home. I want to be in that place where I'm loved and accepted just as I am. That place where there's enough food on the table, where there's water, clean water available, where there's a roof over my head, where I know I'm safe. Do you think our friends in Ukraine simply want to go home this week? And let us remember, Kate Shaner, our minister to mission, reminded me this morning in the early service that it's not just Ukraine that's experiencing this flight of refugees. There are people from Syria continuing to look for a place to call home. People from Yemen who are trying to get away from the atrocities in their country. Refugees come in every creed and every race. That's their desire is what? Simply to be at home. To lay their head down at night, not worried that a missile will destroy their dwelling. I also think that phrase, almost heaven, speaks to that ultimate desire, that ultimate yearning for us to be finally at home, where justice and peace do reign, where when we breathe our last breath, that's not the end of our lives, but the transition into a new life, another life, the life to come. Almost Heaven speaks of that same kind of desire, that place where we can go and where just God's justice will be made real, where peace will be the way for all of God's children. When I say all, I mean all, regardless of who they are or what they believe or don't believe. Almost heaven. Can you dream about it? Almost heaven. On my best days, my faith which is based on Jesus Christ and his life and his teachings, on my best days, my faith believes that this promise will come true for all of us. I do have days when I doubt. Now, maybe it's shocking to you to hear a pastor confess that, but I suspect, I'm pretty sure, don't raise your hand, but I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one who sometimes struggles with doubt and faith. This last week, when the evil actions of the dictator of Russia sent troops into Ukraine, and we saw families fleeing, we saw parents saying goodbye to young children, we saw rockets hitting apartments, tanks rolling over cars, I had doubts. But the promise of heaven is that justice one day will reign, that justice one day will be made true for all of God's children. And that heaven itself will be the place where that work, that desire for justice and peace will finally be made real in all of our lives, and whatever exactly that might be. You know, the Bible is full of all sorts of images and metaphors for heaven. From beginning to end, you can find many interesting things. Sometimes heaven is referred to as a banquet or a wedding party. Sometimes heaven is this giant, huge, unbelievably beautiful city where the gates are always open, where people are free to come and go, where there's enough food in abundance, where there's water, clean water for all. The Bible is full of these mystical dreams of what the life to come might be. And what those do is they reflect back on us now so that we have the courage and the hope to continue to work towards justice. Even in a week like this, when it seems as though evil is taking over, we can together work towards justice. And that's what the dream of heaven is. That finally someday, one way or another, God's will come true. That heaven will come down to earth. What we prayed for will come true. You know, a few Sundays ago I mentioned that I don't believe in hell. And I'm more than happy to have a longer conversation with anyone who would like to discuss that. But I do know that if you want to go to hell, I could take you there. Have you ever been in an ICU? Have you seen someone struggle to breathe? It's a hellish experience. I could take you to places where people have been beaten up physically, mentally, their entire lives. They've lived through hell. We could go to Ukraine. You could find a parent whose son or daughter, in defense of their country, has lost their life, and that parent will tell you, I feel right now as though I'm in hell. You see, the promise of the Bible in one of Peter's letters is that in those hellish places, even if there is a hell in eternity, that Jesus will go there. That's what that you can find that in Peter's second letter. Jesus descends into hell. And this is not just something that happened on one day, and if you happen to be there, okay, good, you get to go home with Jesus. No, continually over and over and over again. The promise is no matter where we find ourselves in this life or the next, God is going to do everything God can do possible to bring us home safely into the arms of love itself. Yes, on most days, my faith believes in this promise. You know, Verity Jones is a good theologian. She happens to be a friend of mine. Her background is in the Disciples of Christ denomination, which is the same one I grew up in and was ordained in. She wrote this week about this text that we heard. She called it, this is where I got this phrase from, she called it a glimpse of heaven. You know, their clothes are shining. There's a voice from the cloud. Jesus is transfigured and transformed. Moses and Elijah appear there. She said it's kind of a glimpse of heaven. Have you ever had a mystical experience like that? Have you ever had a moment when it just felt as though everything in your world was right and was the way it should be? Maybe it was just a moment, maybe a minute or two. It didn't last very long. Maybe it was all day. I don't know. But have you ever had something like that? I've heard people say to me that at the birth of a child or in their wedding ceremony, something mystical seemed to happen. I remember one young bride, 2 weeks after I had performed their marriage, they were back in church. They'd been on their honeymoon to the Caribbean, and she came and met me at the door afterwards for coffee. And while over coffee, she said, you know, and she had tears in her eyes, I don't remember anything about the wedding. I can't remember anything you said. I said, well, that's normal. Don't worry about that. Said, I don't remember anything. The music, and this is before videos and cameras were everywhere. I don't remember anything about it. We haven't gotten our photographs yet from the photographer. I don't remember a thing, but every time I try to think about it, my eyes fill with tears. All I remember is the feeling that I had, that my world was right in that moment. I remember a time that my wife and I took a road trip. down to New Orleans. Our friends Susan and Gary called in the spring and said, hey, this summer we're going to be in New Orleans. Why don't you guys come on down and spend a few days with us? We said that'd be great. And I looked at plane flights, and it was a quick flight from Kansas City, where we were living, down to New Orleans. Not too expensive, not too bad. But Julie, my wife said, let's not fly. Let's make it into a road trip. Let's take a couple of slow days and just drive on down there. It's a great idea. Let's do that. We love to go on road trips. And so I planned it where most of our journey would take place not on the interstates, but on country roads, where we could just go at an even slow pace, take our time, stop at a mom and pop diner for lunch, no fast food, none of that. I remember specifically the second day of our road trip, somewhere in northern Louisiana. We got into one of those conversations. You ever had a conversation like this with your lover, your partner, your friend, your best friend, your spouse? We just had a wonderful little meal at this mom and pop diner where we had a great piece of pie. That's how you can tell they're a good diner, if they have good pie. And we got to talking about life and love and family and our dreams and what we wanted to do next with our family, with our kids, and what we might be doing at the church. And it was just one of those conversations where everything we were discussing really felt real and honest and open and vulnerable and all the rest. And that went on for about an hour, and then we both just stopped and were silent. About 20 minutes of silence. All of a sudden, Julie reached over, took a hold of my hand. I get goosebumps even now. I felt the shiver go through my body. I felt it was just the thought in my mind was, I'm home. Somewhere I could hear John Denver singing, Almost Heaven, Louisiana, because the country road was taking us home. Verity Jones, who I quoted a moment ago, notes that this story we've heard, this strange, unusual story, is almost told in a dreamlike manner. Luke describes it not with any real explanation. He just says basically what he's heard from the disciples they experienced and saw. You know, there's something mystical, isn't there, about these kind of moments where everything seems to be just perfect and right. The old Celtics had a saying that heaven and earth are just 3 feet apart. And in some places, they're closer. And they call those the thin places. I've been to one of them. It was in Louisiana. Maybe you've been to one of those as well. In Jesus' day, it was believed that heaven started right here, at about the height of an average person. In his day, in his time, that heaven was right there, and that everything below that was the earth, everything from there and on up as far as you could see, that all was heaven. And what Jesus wants us to understand, what he wants us to clearly see, is that heaven is already here. It is all around us, and if we open our eyes and our minds and our hearts, we might actually see heavenly things happening even in our church, maybe even in your home or your business or your school. These are the beautiful promises of the Bible itself. Almost heaven. Well, Verity goes on to talk in her article about this text. How would you be different if you could get a true glimpse of heaven, where it could be proved to you beyond a shadow of a doubt that it's real, that it exists? If you could have Jesus and Moses and Elijah appear before you and a voice say, "This is my son, the beloved, listen to him," how would that change you? Would that change the way you treat your friends? Would you be full of life and hope and vigor? Would you want to try to hold on to that moment for as long as you possibly can? Because that's part of the problem. Even if you've had a moment like that, there's nothing you can do to hang on to it. Peter, you can't hear it in the English version of the text, but basically Luke is saying Peter was totally goofy. Nobody knew what he was trying to do. He was trying to build shelters or tents or something for Moses, Elijah, and Jesus. It made no sense. And finally this cloud comes along and Peter's interrupted by God. That's a good sermon title for another day, by the way. Sometimes we need to be interrupted by God. He's interrupted by God, and the voice is very clear. "This is my son. my chosen. Other texts say, my beloved, echoing what was said over Jesus' baptism. This is my child, my beloved child. And then what did the voice say? Listen to him. Moses and Elijah are gone. The brilliant lights stop glowing. Everything goes back to the way it was before this experience happened. Now it's time to go. You see, if you read all of Luke chapter 9, you'll read the section right before the story we just heard where Jesus tells his disciples, I've got to go to Jerusalem. I've got to go and face my own death. I've got to go. The mountaintop experience has faded. It's over. Now it's time to go down the mountain, and it's time to go and face the ones who want to end his life. It's a frightening thing, but here's the truth. Every one of us will have a Jerusalem. Oh, maybe it won't be as dramatic as Jesus, but every one of us will have to face something in our lives that will call out our better self, that will call on us to live with faith, hope, and love, and maybe a good dose of courage. Every one of us will someday have to face this. Tony Campolo, the great Baptist preacher, just had a birthday this week, and so I've seen lots of posts about him. Do you remember his sermon? It's Friday, but Sunday's coming. Have you ever heard that sermon before? You can Google that one too, but let me just tell you how it ends. He gets to the end, and those words are actually the words of a great African-American pastor who's in some kind of a preaching contest that Tony heard years before. It's Friday, but Sunday's coming, that preacher said. It's Friday. It's Good Friday. It's the day they pierced my Lord. It's the day they put him to death and buried him. It's Friday, he says, but it's Sunday's coming. Do you hear the message? This is what my faith is built on. Even on Fridays, even on the darkest days, even on the worst days, it may be Friday, but Sunday's coming. It may be Friday in Ukraine today, but Sunday's coming, and that's where our call comes. That's where you and I are called to do what we can to bring justice to the world. Maybe it means dropping $1 in the plate. Maybe it means taking a moment to pray and center your heart and mind so that the reality of heaven can at least be glimpsed for a moment. Who knows what it means, but you and I are called to stand with faith, hope, love, and a dose of courage to bring about the promises of God Almighty. My friend Verity also quoted Martin Luther King. His greatest sermon, in my view, was his final sermon, delivered in Memphis the night before he's murdered by an assassin the next day. These are words close to the end. I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead, but it doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know that tonight we as a people will get to the promised land. As you can imagine, you can Google this one too. The crowd is filled with cheers and applause. He's speaking with one voice for all of them. And then he ends his sermon saying, I'm afraid of nothing. I'm afraid of no man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. And with that, he collapses into the arms of his best friend. My friends, you and I are called in this moment, to give ourselves to the work of justice in the land, to proclaim it here and there and everywhere, to do whatever we can, whether it's dropping $1 in a plate, providing a place for a refugee family to live, whatever it might be, to do what we can in the name of the one who gave us a glimpse of heaven. Let us find the faith, the hope, the love, and the dose of courage we need. Amen.